The first thing I heard was the jackhammer, rattling the glass in my bedroom window. The second thing was Karen Hensley's voice, sharp and triumphant. "Remove it all. It's not authorized." I shot out of bed, heart pounding. You don't expect to wake up to the sound of construction crews demolishing your sister's wheelchair ramp. I stumbled into the hall, the smell of coffee half brewed in the kitchen mixing with the acrid tang of gasoline from the machines outside. By the time I yanked open the front door, the sun was blazing down on a scene so absurd it felt staged. There she was, Karen, president of the Maplewood Lakes HOA, standing on the curb like a queen overseeing her peasants. Oversized sunglasses, wide-brimmed sun hat, clipboard in hand. Behind her, two men in neon vests worked the jackhammer, concrete chunks flying as dust clouded the air. The wheelchair ramp we'd poured just last month crumbled under their boots. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking over the din. My sister, Emily, had rolled into the doorway behind me, her face pale with disbelief. That ramp was her lifeline, her independence carved in concrete, and in less than 5 minutes it was being chewed to rubble. Karen didn't flinch. "This structure violates community standards," she said, raising her voice like she was addressing a crowd. "Unapproved alterations are subject to removal. You were warned." I laughed, but it wasn't from humor. "Warned? Karen, that ramp was approved by the city. It meets ADA requirements. You can't just bulldoze it." "City approval doesn't override HOA covenants," she replied, smug as ever. "We have rules for a reason. Aesthetic harmony. Property values. If everyone builds whatever they want, what happens to the neighborhood?" The jackhammer slammed down again, drowning out my words as I cursed. Emily's hands gripped her chair, knuckles white. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some openly watching from porches. Nobody moved. Nobody dared challenge Karen. But this wasn't some mailbox dispute or a fight over holiday lights. This was personal. Here's the thing about Karen. She ran the HOA like a medieval fiefdom. Letters slipped into mailboxes without stamps, always typed in bold Times New Roman. Violations for everything from grass half an inch too tall to wind chimes that tinkled past curfew. Last fall, she fined the Millers $100 for painting their shutters the wrong shade of taupe. She once threatened to sue a family for planting sunflowers, claiming they obstructed uniform sightlines. People grumbled, but they paid. It was easier than fighting, until now. The wheelchair ramp had been Emily's first taste of freedom since her accident. For weeks, she'd been trapped inside, relying on me to haul her chair down the front steps. The day the concrete set, she cried. Not because she was sad, but because she could finally wheel herself to the mailbox, to the car, to the world. And now Karen was erasing it, like it was an unsightly garden gnome. I stormed down the path, dust settling on my shirt. "Karen, you're trespassing. You have no authority to do this." She smirked, flipping her clipboard to a page of bylaws. Section 12.4, Exterior Modifications. All changes must be submitted for board approval. You didn't submit, therefore non-compliant. "That's not how this works," I snapped. "We followed the law." "The law of the HOA is the law of Maplewood Lakes," she replied, and I swear she believed it. One of the workers paused, looking uneasy. "Ma'am, are you sure about this? Looks like a medical thing." Karen snapped, "Keep going." And they did. The ramp that had taken weeks of planning and saving, gone in under an hour. The sound of breaking concrete still echoes in my head. Sharp, final, merciless. By the time they finished, Emily had retreated into her room, silent tears streaking her cheeks. I stood in the driveway, fists clenched, while Karen gave a little wave to the neighbors gawking from their lawns. "Just doing my duty," she called out like a soldier in uniform. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the rubble of our day. Dust tracked in from the workers' boots, city permits still neatly folded in a manila folder, Emily's silence pressing heavy between us. I thought about every petty letter Karen had ever sent, every neighbor too scared to push back. She'd gotten away with it because nobody had the time, the money, or the nerve to fight her. But this wasn't just about rules anymore. This was about dignity, about my sister. Emily wheeled into the room, her voice low but steady. She thinks she won. I met her eyes. She doesn't know who she just messed with. Emily's lips curved into the faintest smile. Good, let her find out the hard way. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet again, houses glowing under the streetlights like nothing had happened. But inside, I felt the first spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. Karen thought she'd crushed a ramp. She didn't realize she'd just set the stage for her own downfall. Order, order, Karen called, banging her little wooden gavel against a folding table as if she were presiding over the Supreme Court instead of 20 sweaty neighbors crammed into the Maplewood Lakes clubhouse. I almost laughed. She stood at the front of the room in a bright red blazer, smiling like she'd just won a trophy. The unauthorized wheelchair ramp has been removed, she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is what it looks like when we enforce standards. Property values come first. I glanced at my sister, Emily, sitting quietly beside me with her phone in hand. She wasn't scrolling social media, she was dialing. The glow of the screen lit her face as Karen droned on about bylaws and aesthetics, blissfully unaware that the woman she just humiliated was already reaching beyond the subdivision, to the state capitol. That's the thing about Karen. She believed her power ended at the curbside, which made her feel invincible inside the neighborhood. She never looked beyond, never considered that someone might outrank her, that her binder of bylaws could be overshadowed by something far bigger. And watching her boast that night, I realized she was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The clubhouse smelled faintly of mildew, the kind of scent that clung to old carpet and folding chairs. A ceiling fan squeaked overhead, barely stirring the thick air. Around the table, neighbors sat stiffly, nodding at the right times but avoiding eye contact with Karen. She thrived on their silence. She treated every shrug as consent, every muttered, "fine," as loyalty. Next order of business, she continued, flipping a page. Several homeowners failed to mow their lawns within the regulation 3-inch limit. Letters will be issued. I heard Dana, seated 2 rows back, sigh under her breath. Last month she'd been fined $50 because her lawn crew came a day late after a storm. Karen kept going. Mailbox flags must be red, not black, as stipulated in Section 9.3. Non-compliance will result in immediate penalties. My neighbor, Thompson, an 80-year-old veteran, muttered, "Good grief." He'd gotten 3 letters that summer about his flag. 3. It was like watching a school principal lecturing kids who knew better than to talk back. The absurdity would have been funny if it hadn't been so cruel. I leaned toward Emily. "You hearing this?" She didn't look up from her phone. Loud and clear. Karen went on about community image and uniform standards, her voice carrying that practiced authority. I scanned the room. Everyone was tired. They wanted to push back, but who had the energy to fight fines, threats of liens, or Karen's constant barrage of letters? The truth was, the HOA had become less about community upkeep and more about Karen's need to control. She wielded her clipboard like a sword. She wasn't just protecting property values, she was policing personality, crushing individuality one shutter, one mailbox, one ramp at a time. And here's where things took a turn. Emily finally looked up from her phone, her expression calm but sharp. She whispered, "She really doesn't know who she's dealing with." I raised an eyebrow. "Care to elaborate?" "Not yet," she said softly, but there was a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen since before her accident. It was the look of someone who wasn't just angry. She was planning. Karen wrapped up her meeting with a smug little flourish. "That concludes tonight's agenda. Remember, neighbors, rules exist for a reason, and Maplewood Lakes is stronger because we enforce them." The room broke into half-hearted applause, more a way to signal they were ready to leave than genuine approval. People shuffled toward the door, murmuring under their breath. I heard snippets as we filed out. "Can you believe the ramp? Heartless." She fined me for leaving my trash cans out 30 minutes too long. She's out of control. But no one said it to her face. Not yet. Outside, the night air was cooler, carrying the smell of freshly cut grass from someone's yard. Porch lights blinked on, one by one, as neighbors trudged home. Karen lingered near the door, soaking in her self-importance like she'd just delivered a State of the Union. Emily and I headed for the car. She was quiet until we reached the curb, then finally broke the silence. "She thinks this ends with her little gavel," she said, her tone almost amused. "She has no idea what's coming." I studied her face in the glow of the street lamp. She wasn't bluffing. She had connections, influence I'd nearly forgotten about. To me, she was just my sister, the one I helped into the car, the one I poured a ramp for. But to the rest of the world, she was something more, someone with power Karen couldn't dream of matching. I swallowed hard, a mix of pride and anticipation swelling in my chest. "Emily, what are you planning?" She gave me that faint smile again, the same one she'd worn after the ramp was demolished. "Let's just say Karen's about to find out what real authority looks like." The cicadas buzzed louder as we pulled away, leaving the clubhouse lights shrinking in the rearview mirror. Behind us, Karen probably went home to polish her binder, already drafting her next round of fines. But she was fighting the wrong battle, because my sister wasn't just another homeowner. And once Karen realized exactly who she had crossed, Maplewood Lakes would never be the same. "I wouldn't count on that grant, Mrs. Hensley." The voice sliced through the clubhouse like a blade, crisp and commanding. Karen's gavel froze mid-air, her knuckles whitening as the sound echoed off the beige cinder-block walls. And then the room erupted in gasps, because the person standing in the doorway wasn't another timid neighbor. It was my sister, Governor Emily, flanked by 2 aides in tailored suits. You could feel the air shift in an instant. The same neighbors who'd been slumped in plastic chairs suddenly sat upright. The same people who whispered complaints under their breath now leaned forward, wide-eyed, sensing something seismic. Even the flickering fluorescent lights above seemed to hum louder, spotlighting the scene. Karen's smile faltered. For the first time, she looked unsure. Here's the thing. Karen thrived on dominance. She lived for the sound of her own gavel, the weight of silence when she spoke, the petty power of fining a neighbor $50 for a mailbox that didn't harmonize. She assumed her empire was untouchable because no one dared stand up to her. But that night, she found out what happens when you overstep with the wrong family. The meeting had started like any other. I'd been half dreading, half looking forward to it, because Karen was always more theatrical after a victory. She marched to the front of the room in a turquoise blazer and gold necklace, tapping her binder like a preacher about to deliver a sermon. "We're here to preserve Maplewood Lake's image," she declared. "Thanks to our diligence, we've secured access to the next round of state infrastructure grants. With these funds, we'll finally be able to redo the pool deck and resurface the walking trails." Her tone was triumphant, almost smug, like she'd personally wrestled the money out of thin air. Neighbors gave the usual scattered claps, the kind that said, "Fine, Karen, whatever you want." I kept glancing at the door. Emily had promised she'd show up, but a part of me doubted it. Not because she couldn't, she was busy running an entire state, but because this place seemed too small for her, too trivial. What governor had time for an HOA meeting? But when she walked in, calm and steady, every ounce of doubt evaporated. Karen sputtered, lowering her gavel. "Excuse me, this is a closed meeting." Emily didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her aides trailing like shadows, and said evenly, "No, Mrs. Hensley, it's not. Not when you're misrepresenting state funds to this community." The room went dead silent. You could have heard the ceiling fan squeak 3 rotations before anyone breathed. Karen tried to recover, pasting on a brittle smile. I'm sorry, who exactly are you?" I almost laughed. She really didn't know. Emily pulled herself tall, her presence filling the cramped clubhouse like it was a Capitol chamber. "I'm Governor Emily Carter," she said, her voice ringing clear. "And I'm also a resident of this neighborhood." Mouths dropped open. Dana clutched her husband's arm. Thompson actually sat up straighter than I'd ever seen him. Karen, though, looked like someone had pulled the rug right out from under her kitten heels. "You've been boasting about infrastructure grants," Emily continued, her tone sharpened to a point. "Those grants are not automatic. They require review and approval. And the person who signs off on them," she paused, letting the tension thicken, "is me." The shift was instantaneous. Neighbors' faces lit up with something I hadn't seen at a meeting in years. Delight. Actual, unfiltered delight. All those bottled-up frustrations, mailbox flags, lawn fines, ramp demolitions, suddenly had a release valve. Karen's gavel clattered onto the table. "This is highly irregular," she stammered. "The HOA operates independently. We enforce our own rules." "Your rules," Emily said firmly, "have gone too far. You don't get to bulldoze accessibility ramps. You don't get to fine veterans for mailbox flags. And you certainly don't get to misuse the promise of state funds to keep yourself in power." A murmur of agreement swelled across the room. Someone actually clapped. Karen's face flushed beet red, but she stayed frozen, her binder of bylaws suddenly looking like a child's notebook. She opened her mouth to argue, but Emily silenced her with 3 sharp words. "Funding denied. Effective." Each syllable landed like a hammer blow. And just like that, the empire Karen built on threats and paperwork crumbled. Neighbors gasped again, then burst into scattered applause that built into cheers. Dana laughed out loud. Thompson muttered, "About damn time." The air felt electric, charged with something new. Freedom. Karen, though, stood rooted at the front of the room, her once mighty gavel abandoned on the table. She looked around, searching for support, but all the faces she'd kept cowed for years now shone with relief. No one came to her rescue. I'll never forget the final image as we left. Karen Hensley standing silent, clutching her binder like a lifeline, while the community she ruled over erupted into applause. Her voice, her power, her little suburban fiefdom, gone in an instant. But as the cheers spilled into the parking lot, I caught Emily's expression. She wasn't celebrating yet. She knew Karen wasn't the type to surrender gracefully. And in that flicker of caution, I realized this war might not be over. Because queens don't step off their thrones quietly.